battle in Pokemon Black 2 and White 2 if the player traded for a shiny Excadrill, Hypodon used by the same character in her second battle if the player traded for a shiny Hypodon, the fledgling that the rival of Kalimar Serena uses in the capture tutorial in Pokemon X and Y, the Bunnelby that the same characters use in the capture tutorial, the Execute used by Sightseer Marcus in the 7th generation of Pokemon games, and Arven's Pokemon used in the battles against the Titan Pokemon in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Scarlet and Violet. Transforming into a non-shiny Pokemon.
I am staring at the photos that John Levine took with that Hasselblad, and I think that they themselves are proof that he's telling the truth. The extraordinary detail in these photographs, and it is as if for the very first time in my life, and I have been trying to study UFOs and ETs and what is behind animal mutilations and human abductions and government cover-up for 4 decades. And I am looking at a face with such remarkable, intricate detail of the gray alien face. There is the lander in the foreground. In between is the alien moon buggy, and to the back is the Earth. The irony, it is our own Earth that is rising behind these instruments in the front, all reflected in this huge black shiny eye of this gray being. What is not included in this Apollo 17 official NASA history, not only are these photographs not included, but it is the alleged presence of a secret astronaut named John Harold Levine. A secret substitute for one of the 3 other men, or was it in addition? His mind wipe experiences, I have heard this from several dozen other people that I've interviewed over the years. If you were working in conjunction with any of these programs having to do with non-humans and the huge big story, then chemical or hypnosis, mind wiping selectively, how long would it last? And how complete would it be? And when you talk with John Levine for 7 hours, you are getting incredible
What's up,
detail,
Zach?
but there will be parts that he says, I know that I can't remember this because of the mind wipe. In order to telepathically communicate with one of these alien beings, and this was in the Taurus Littrow Valley region, it is that John Levine had this ability. And he was then selected 1 year later, in 1973, to go on yet another secret Apollo 18. And he was the secret astronaut on that secret Apollo flight. He wasn't in the crew that went in the lunar lander to the moon's surface. John was the command module pilot that stayed in the air waiting for the lander's rendezvous with it.
You better chill there, Sasha.
But something terrible happened on Apollo 18.
JoJo's Bizarre
John
Adventure.
Transmission from NASA that the lander astronauts that were on the lunar soil seemed incoherent, not even speaking English. And NASA wanted John Levine to get back to Earth as soon as possible without Earth. Here now, John Levine continues. Apollo 20 was astounding.
NASA probably figured that that particular area was what that alien was primarily concerned with and what that particular group of aliens owned or had control of.
Of the moon.
That's correct. And one reason NASA may have kept it secret is so that particular group of aliens couldn't pick up our communications and realize that we were launching additional rockets to the moon.
Which the NASA administration, in collaboration with the CIA and other intelligence agencies, decided that after the Apollo 17 warning, do not come back to the moon, the United States launched Apollo 18, 19, and 20 as secret missions.
They did, yeah.
19 and 20 as secret missions?
They did, yes. 18, I was a command module pilot. I didn't go to the moon. The astronauts, something happened to them. They went crazy. They got sick.
When you say that the astronauts on Apollo 18 went crazy, what happened?
I don't know. NASA just told me they went totally crazy. And they don't appear normal at all. In fact, I think they said they weren't even speaking English anymore. They were speaking a foreign language.
They had landed on the moon,
That's correct.
and so this could have been frequencies that were being focused at the Apollo 18 astronauts by the Greys.
Yeah, that's possible. It could be frequencies. NASA thought that they picked up an infection of some type, but your supposition that they may have been frequencies could easily be the case. May not have been Greys. I have a feeling there's a lot of different aliens on the moon than just the Greys.
So they have territorialized the moon, perhaps the reptiles, the Nordics, and the Greys.
That's what I tend to believe.
Have you had any discussion, even speculating about that with somebody at NASA?
No, but in Apollo 20, William Rutledge, he was the commander.
And you stayed with him to go down in the lander to the surface of the moon to explore the huge spacecraft.
That's correct. We picked up what appears to be a Nordic of some type, the Moon Girl.
Okay, before we get to that, let's stay with 18. Apollo 18, nobody outside of NASA and those of you working knew that there was any launch of an Apollo 18.
Yeah, I believe that was a Vandenberg launch also. All I know is I started getting information from Houston that they were exhibiting aberrant behavior and the situation was grave.
Spanish.
So that was 18. Who commanded the secret 19?
That I don't know. I wasn't selected for it, and I have no idea anything about 19 other than I heard it was a failure.
Failure would mean,
It didn't come back for whatever reason.
so 20. Why did they decide to do a 20th mission since 17 was a warning of gray to you telepathically? 18, the astronauts went mad and died on the moon. Then 19, there was no
I just broke my
return,
keyboard
was a
trying to kiss
failure.
it. Kiss it
How
harder.
did they decide to do a 20th mission?
Well, you have to remember that most of the people involved were prior military men, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Same thing's true in war. Sometimes your squadrons don't come back. It doesn't mean you stop, you keep on going. William Rutledge, he was the commander, person in charge. I was the lunar module pilot, so I was actually the one with the control stick that took the lunar lander down.
What happened?
Well, we had a safe landing near the big spaceship that was down there.
What shape?
Okay, that's funny.
A very large cigar-shaped
Kiss it
spaceship
harder,
that
Ben.
was discovered on Apollo 15 pictures. That's what we were aiming for. To the best of my knowledge, they never explained it. They simply were going there, and that was it. It was a military mission.
What are you seeing in terms of the detail of this cigar?
Well, it's huge.
How big?
We're talking about something several miles long.
In fact, I have found reference about a 4.8 kilometer cigar-shaped craft investigated on the moon, and 4.8 is almost 3 miles long.
Yes, it was huge. And when we approached the ship, we had a rope ladder, and we were able to throw it up and hook it and go up the side. We were told by NASA to go up into the main groove on the top. It looks like just a small groove from the picture, but in reality it was probably 30 feet wide. Rutledge had a torch that would cut through almost any metal. We determined right near the center that that's probably the best way to enter, and we took off one of the hatches and entered. I had warned Rutledge. I said, I've been inside a battleship once. You gotta be careful, we could get lost in there. So Rutledge was actually marking the doors as we moved, which turned out to be extremely important in getting out of there. We had flashlights, very powerful ones. Once we got inside, we had to use them. There was no light. Fortunately, the hatches weren't locked. And once we were inside, we just kept moving toward the front, hoping we would find a cockpit there. And finally we did.
Were you anticipating that you were going to meet non-humans inside of this big cigar?
We had no idea what would be inside that big cigar craft. We went through hatch after hatch, and we finally opened the hatch and saw the two beings, both dead. Gray, his body had almost totally deteriorated. We saved the head, cut the head off, and Rex put it in a container.
And was this Gray on Apollo 20 the same type of head and face as you photographed on Apollo 17?
Yeah, looked a little bit more like the Grays that the Zeta Reticuli that we're supposed to have dealt with out west.
What are they supposed to look like?
Large, bulbous heads, thin bodies, probably 5, maybe 5.5 feet in length.
Are they friendly or unfriendly from your background working for NASA as a secret astronaut?
Apparently we got into quite a row with them back in 47, which had to do with the use of radar.
We were trying to use microwaves in experiments to see if we could bring down UFOs. That is what I have been told.
That's what I tend to believe also, but I've never seen anything behind the scenes on it.
And those particular Grays then interpreted that assault on them as a reason to shoot down our pilots in planes. Leonard Stringfield told me that from his work in the Air Force, and he ended up writing Situation Red of his great concern, he said, Linda, we lost so many pilots in skirmishes with UFOs, but none of the families were ever told the true reason that the pilots crashed.
That all took place, and those were our World War II leaders, and they were very cold, very tough military men, and they didn't think anything of combat. For them, that was normal, and they threw everything they had at the Zeta Reticulans. And the Zeta Reticulans had a higher level of technology, and from what I've read, nothing that I know from behind the scenes, apparently some of the pilots disappeared out of the cockpits, probably teleported on board the alien ships, and this shook our military up pretty bad because we knew then we were dealing with a much higher level of technology than our own.
Yes, I've heard exactly that description. The pilots that have been plucked right out of moving airplanes, jets. What other types did you know about from your work in Apollo 17 through 20?
Apollo 17, there was a Gray. I don't think it was Zeta Reticulum. His head was a different shape. I had telepathy with him. As most aliens, if you meet them, they're very bright. They have to be. They're selected for that, I believe, within their own society to go out on the ships. He said we really shouldn't be there, and he didn't want us back on the moon.
What was that type of Gray supposed to be?
We didn't really receive much in the way of briefings, and I think NASA knew that there were aliens on the moon because they'd been up there. I think Apollo
NASA
11
knew.
may
You
have
heard
had
it here
some
first,
problems in that
confirmed.
regard.
Apollo 15 took the photograph of the huge cigar on the moon that you guys then go back to in 76 in Apollo 20 that was all top secret.
That's correct.
So now we are in that spacecraft. You have found the dead Gray in the cockpit with the beautiful Polynesian-looking woman who looks almost preserved. What type of Gray was that in the big 3-mile-long cylinder?
The Gray did not appear to be the same as either the Zeta Reticulans or the Gray at Apollo 17. It had a little bit smaller head than the Zeta Reticulans and didn't have the dark gray face shape as the one at Apollo 17. Then the woman was there as well. She was in a jumpsuit, and Rutledge made a decision to bring the woman back because her body didn't seem to have deteriorated very much at all.
Describe it.
Humanoid. She had these things on her face, tubes, grayish tubes. I took the video.
You got a camera and you take video in there. Are you saying that the video and the photo of the Gray that were NASA property and that you took have actually ended up on the web?
Yes, and I'm of the belief, based upon things that were said at the time they showed up, that these things were being beamed back to Earth. And from what I read at the time, in Eastern Europe, they had the ability to pick them up, and they did, and they put them on the web.
On the internet when?
I'm guessing when we got back to the ship, the videos were processed for transmission. on the web later, but the pickup was done in 76. My personal guess is the Russians did it. Remember, that was the old Soviet Union back then, and a lot of Eastern Europe was part of the Soviet Union.
This video that you took of the gray and the woman would be at what URL?
Apollo 20. It's all over the web now. There's a number of them on YouTube, and now there's a bunch claiming it's a hoax. Wikipedia claims it's a hoax. I believe this is probably at the instigation of the United States government, but that's just my guess.
But you're telling me right now that the photograph of the gray that you took on 17 and the videotape of the Polynesian-looking Nordic with the tubes on her face and the deteriorated gray inside this big cigar are real, and you are the one who took the video.
That's correct.
What do you think of this guy?
Oh, it's for real. I'm telling you, you guys, you're hearing truth, finally. I mean, there have been pieces of this for the last 40 years, and now it's beginning to come together in the whistleblowers. He's not the only whistleblower I am talking to that reinforces this, but this is the first human being that I have met in my life and career who, I think when you go into these Earth Files reports and you see all of his DD-214s and all of the other certificates, and you understand that this is a reality, that NASA and the CIA were born together in many ways. The CIA came first in September 18th, 1947. But when NASA was born, we'll call it the window dressing, was to say to the world that NASA was like a public, for the public, to go into space and all of the fun of Star Wars. But the truth was, behind it always, and I have been told this for at least 30 years, was the Central Intelligence Agency and other intelligence agencies and military operations, because we knew that there was an alien presence. It goes back to that phrase that was used at the time of the JFK assassination and that period of time, an alien presence on the moon and on Earth, and now the suspicion is that this goes on out to Mars and to our solar system and into the Milky Way galaxy, and that the universe is teeming with life exactly as the remote viewers have said. And that in this instance, this is the first, I don't know of anybody who has spoken with the details of John Harold Levine, as I have heard, and one of the very interesting distinctions that he is making for the very first time, I'm beginning to understand this.
Ancient alien ancestors. Will Hart's with us with
Damn,
an
that was
incredible story.
close.
Well, it goes back to Mexico, and it goes back to Eric Von Däniken, and I read his books when they came out. You and I are, the same generation.
Mm-hmm.
And back there in the early 70s when it came out, I read it. I got very interested, and I decided to do a complete tour of Mexico and see for myself. Look at these things up close and personal, study, go to every museum. I went to every major site all around the country. The Olmec heads had me very intrigued and asking questions, because there are many mysteries about it. Those heads were quarried 70 miles from where they ended up in mountains, and, the people, whoever did it, had to carry them, transport them from the mountains 70 miles through jungle. Nobody can explain how they did that. Archaeologists don't try. The basalt heads are, that's hard to work. That's a hard stone to work, and where are the tools that did it? And those kind of questions had me thinking, these are very strange to find here. Why are they African in appearance? Why do they have helmets on? But then as I traveled around, a lot of the sites didn't say alien right off. Till I made the whole circuit around the country and came back to Teotihuacan, the first time I visited. When I got there, I was completely stunned. When I walked, climbed up the pyramids and stood there and looked out the valley there, the place is just unimaginably complicated, and it looks like some kind of a circuit board. It was so meticulously laid out. And when I found the mica was up, sandwiched into the top layer of the pyramid, and then at a so-called temple, I just think it was a room, there was also mica, and a room full of mica. mica underneath the floor, I must say it blew me away because mica, you know what the use is today. I mean, it's an insulator, electrical, heat insulator, radiation, so on. I mean, that's what it's for. So I just thought, I'm looking at something here that really, really needs some serious stuff.
Right. Somebody a long time ago knew what that was for, and that is way beyond any technology we could have imagined then.
Now that they found the mercury underneath the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, to me, to connect the dots, here you have mica, which is an insulator, and mercury, which is a good conductor, and we found mercury in China as well. In the Hindu, in their ancient texts about the Vimanas, they used mercury to propel them. So these connections are starting to come now to where it's starting to make more sense. We don't just have little pieces, that are just hanging out there disconnected. It's getting very scientific now. We've compiled so much evidence. Just hope the public can keep up with it because everything is changing very fast.
It is fast, and it's coming at them, the public, in a rapid fashion. But they've got to be able to digest it. But I think they have the capability, Will. I think people really understand this. They grasp it. They want it. More so than years ago. I think they can handle it.
It takes a while, though, to wrap your mind around it. When it first came to me, I was kind of in a state of shock.
You wouldn't think they'd be into it as much as they were, but...
Yeah, it is. I agree. The younger people, and especially researchers, younger researchers, I've been running across a few now who are very sharp, who are very good, and they get it. Eric Von Daniken and you and I, we're moving along here and doing our job, but if the younger generation doesn't pick up the baton, then what?
Exactly.
And I'm seeing it now.
Let's go even back further, not only from that area in Mexico and Central America, but let's go to Egypt for a second. You've looked there too, haven't you?
My research into Egypt, well, it's been extensive. I'm not an archaeologist, though. Maybe we need to go over that point because I think a lot of people get confused. And when archaeologists attack Eric Von Daniken or Graham Hancock or somebody like me, my response is, I'm not an archaeologist. I'm an independent historian. Each of us has the right to be an independent historian. None of us has the right to go conduct archaeological excavations unless we have a license. There's an important distinction there because how we interpret this history that we're given, the pieces that archaeologists and historians and anthropologists give us, it's up to us to interpret it.
Well, there's no question about that. And when you look at the pyramids of Giza, for example, any great building has to have had some kind of archaeological sketching or something for planning. You just don't throw blocks together.
The Great Pyramid, the thing about it, because I want to nail it down to people, why is it that I say the Egyptians could not have built the Great Pyramid? Well, I'll tell you why, because it was precision engineered. The Egyptians had no precision engineering. And archaeologists use circular logic. They say, well, there the Great Pyramid is, and all we know is the Egyptians were there, so they must have built it, and they must have been sophisticated. No, they weren't. We know what their tools are. They're in the museum. They're very primitive.
That's right.
They claim that they use round hammer stones to make these incredibly sophisticated artifacts with sharp right angles, diorite statues that are perfectly smooth, that you can't create by hand. You can't do it. The Great Pyramid, the engineering, forensic engineering firm, international, it's got like 4 names to it, Smith, Johnson, and so on, was brought in by Egyptologists to study, analyze, and give their assessment of the Great Pyramid. The first thing they said was the base is so level, we would achieve it today using lasers. How could people or surveyors called rope stretchers in Egypt have done such a thing with workers using round hammer stones on 13 acres of a very rugged, uneven plateau out there, Giza? The whole scenario, you just keep looking at it and go, why are we accepting these silly proposals when our common sense tells us, no, this couldn't have been done this way? Nobody did that. Could make a 48-story precision-engineered building with these primitive tools.
It's impossible.
Yeah, it's utterly impossible. And I think part of what our job is, right, is to convince people, just use your common sense.
Even if, Will, time was a factor here, and the argument was many thousands of people and workers, and
yeah, I know they throw numbers at it.
They throw numbers and time at it, and that still doesn't mean perfection. nobody has explained to me how they could move blocks, and I don't agree with the theory that they put them on wooden rollers and pull these things.
Yeah, my counter to, they always go to the, how you transported them across the ground. What I go to is lifting. You take a 70-ton block, which is 28 feet long, that are up in the King's Chamber, the granite blocks that are in the King's Chamber. That's 150 vertical feet off the ground. They had to get these 70-ton blocks. First you had to quarry it. When they throw numbers, and ropes, and they're pulling it across the sand is one thing. When you try to lift, you get a limited number of men positioned around the stone, and they cannot possibly lift 70 tons.
We don't even have cranes that could do that.
Our mobile cranes, we might have a few now, but hey, for 5,000 years into civilization, we ought to be able to do those things. We're looking back at people who, they didn't have anything for technology. They had nothing. They didn't even have the wheel. I don't know if people realize how primitive the Egyptians were in the Old Kingdom. They didn't have the wheel. They didn't have bronze. They didn't have dray animals. They'll be burden. They say, well, we had slaves. 10,000 people, they can do it. No, they can't. Physics. You can only position so many men along a 28-foot, maybe 12 or 13 on one side and on the other. They can't lift 70 tons. Never. And they never did. My challenge to archaeologists is quit saying these stupid things that are just confusing the public and prove it. That is scientific. Right there you can hold an experiment and prove it. All you need is men and a big block of stone. Show us that they can lift it, and we'll believe you. If you can't do it, and of course they won't. They will never try that ever. We're in this game, and it's not science, it's politics, right?
That's right, exact purpose.
Academic politics is strangling this whole thing, and it's up to the public to start telling them, we're not buying your nonsense anymore.
What's the purpose of the Great Pyramids? What do you think? Christopher Dunn thinks they were power sources.
I agree with Dunn in terms of, I think it was a machine, an operating machine at one point. I don't think when he parallels it to the way we generate electricity, I don't think they were generating electricity. I think it was subtler than that. I think they were using ELF, or extremely low frequency energy, and not, because I don't see any evidence that there was any download devices anywhere. Even Tesla's, wireless energy tower, you were going to have a download device. I think that it was generating energy, and we're not quite there to understand the technology because we keep looking through the lens of our own technology, right? We keep projecting like, oh, it's got to be like, well, no, it doesn't have to be like anything we're doing. And if you look at the Great Pyramid and study it, everything that made it workable was dismantled, was taken out of it, and then it was plugged up. Whoever did it didn't really want anybody who came along after them to know exactly what they were doing. It was hermetically sealed. Everything that was in the Grand Gallery was taken out. There was a lot of damage inside of it. You couldn't make it workable again. It just doesn't seem like we can do it. I don't think it had one purpose. I think it had many. That's my assessment of it. The discovery I made was that one of the purposes of the Great Pyramid, it is the GPS anchor of the planet. Basically, you know that there's on 30-degree north latitude, the Great Pyramid sits just below it. Abu Roash is actually right on it. Then you go to the east, and what you find is the city of Ur, the Sumerian city, is right on 30. You keep going, you find that Harappa, which was the Indus Valley, the civilization city, is right on the 30 north. That Lhasa Tibet is right on it, and you keep going around, and the other thing you find with it is, though, that the mouth of the Nile, the delta, is right on 30 north. So the deltas of all these major rivers, including all the way around to the Yangtze, and then on the other side, the Mississippi River, are right on 30 north. That gives you the key that, okay, they're showing you the actual geometry of the planet. We screwed it up, we screwed ourselves up, and not seeing the geometry of the planet by making Greenwich, because Greenwich is not the natural longitude. The Great Pyramid sits right on it, all those pyramids, and the Nile goes right along the longitude line that goes down to the equator.
Now, there's got to be a significance to this, a purpose, right?
It shows the geometry. Is Earth. Geometry is kind of the logical layout of the planet, and there is one. The mouth of the Mississippi River is exactly 120 degrees from the mouth of the Nile. That's a significant geometrical figure. You have to kind of approach it and ask questions like the geology of the planet. Why would these rivers terminate from the landmass to seas? Take, for instance, the Mississippi River comes to the Gulf of Mexico on 30 North. That's exactly where New Orleans is, on 30 North. That's where the Delta is. Well, the same thing with the Nile. Well, the same thing with the Tigris and Euphrates. Well, the same thing with the Yangtze. Why would these rivers terminate? Because we geologists tell us they know what the processes are, erosion and deposition and so on, but nobody thinks of it in terms of how did this organization happen where everything, these land masses terminate and rivers go into the seas around this same band around the Earth, the exact same band around the Earth in the Northern Hemisphere. It's a very deep question and nobody has the answer for that. I would just speculate theoretically that the Earth was terraformed. The Great Pyramid is showing us, it's one of the indicators, one of the signatures of the race that did it, that when we get to the level where we can understand this stuff, that look around, this has all been planned out, this has all been engineered. You're not just in some random mess here. That's how I read it, and that's what I mean. And that's a big step. Theoretically, are scientists going to do? I don't think they'll even answer questions for a long time.
And with it being terraformed, of course, it could also have been seeded, right?
Absolutely. That's why I don't just approach this through archaeology. I approach it through science. I approach it through directed panspermia and panspermia, which is just what you're saying, the theories that life is out there everywhere in the universe, and planets get seeded when the time is right, and that's what happened to the Earth. More scientists now are taking panspermia seriously, that it gets delivered by meteorites. Directed panspermia, Sir Francis Crick, the eminent microbiologist who came up with the shape of DNA, he proposed about the same time Eric von Daniken was making his proposal that an advanced alien civilization seeded the Earth. But that was a better explanation than evolution or anything the scientists have come up with so far.
Dale Harder with us and Goshaw with us as well. Goshaw, if you were invited to the United Nations to make a speech about extraterrestrials, what would that speech be?
Long. That speech would be long. I have so much to say and I would share so much. It would be very interesting. I wouldn't even know where to start. I just want to say that the main message, okay, I would probably just focus on the main message here, is that seriously, people are living in a false reality, apart from the fact that there are frequencies from the moon that are projected onto the Earth that are suppressing our consciousness and our frequency. That's why we are locked into the 3D matrix reality. Apart from the fact there is a false system of the matrix set up on Earth, lies basically everywhere, religions, government, science, everything is false. So people need to realize that they are the ones who are actually maintaining and generating this matrix, supporting the matrix. What they really have to do is to raise their perception beyond the lies, beyond the system, and integrate more and more in their perception, because with their perception being raised, their frequency increases, and they can get out of this slowly. It's really on them. They need to get out of the victim mode, stop waiting for saviors from the outside, just because they are out there and helping and assisting, because they are and have been for millions of years. The job and responsibility is on us, and we need to rediscover that power within us and start taking action. Start taking action daily life, starting from simple things, and start to reprogram that matrix, because something I didn't explain is that matrix from the moon, it's actually kind of like a living machine, and it reads our thoughts and intentions, and it actually picks up on that, and it gives back to the humanity what we put into it. We need to just basically realize the power that we have, and they are not here to save us. They are not angels, they are not our saviors, they are not some mystical creatures. They are people who have been here assisting us, but the main power is on us. We are the ones here, the real troops.
How about you, Dale? What if you were invited to the UN?
It all comes down to the fact that, as we've been talking, and as Maru and the team has gathered their information regarding contact and so forth, and made their final reports only within the last weeks, if you will, and arrived at their various conclusions. But it has come down to basically learning that humanity itself is its own worst enemy. We are the ones that are creating what we are experiencing here, even now. It's not being perpetrated on us. This is not a prison planet. The reptilians are basically out of the picture at this point, and we have been, have not been reduced to ash or anything of that nature. We are creating our experiences according to our beliefs, and as soon as we can change those, the better that we're going to be. At this point in time, we have not learned to do that. We are still struggling with everything that we experience every day. So the mentality that we have as we live every day is perpetrated on and on and on. We need to concentrate on raising our frequencies as high as possible, and we do that by eating the correct foods, get away from the damn GMOs, get away from all the sugars, get away from the things that are making us fat and sloppy, and thinking high thoughts.
Self-talk. She's a spiritual counselor conducting soul sessions as well.
My earliest recollection is when I was 10, and I would be regularly visited by a spacecraft, and I would be outside, and I would see it coming, and each time it would come from a different direction. It would hover over me. I could see the bottom of the craft. It would land, and a being would come out, and the being was similar to a human, slightly different. It was a male, a young male, and he had dark hair, and his ears were just slightly different. They were a little more elongated, and he was wearing dark clothes. I can't remember if it was a jumpsuit or separate. And every time I saw the spaceship, and every time I saw him, I was so happy. It was like a reunion with a brother. And he was coming to check up on me, just to make sure I was okay. And after this meeting, I would be popped back into my bedroom, and I would then have to get dressed and go to 6th grade. And I didn't say anything to anybody, not even my parents, who were very in tune and were believers, but I still kept it to myself for years. This went on for a couple of years. And then there was a final meeting. This time it was a little different, because this time I was with a group of other kids, and I didn't see their faces because we were all lined up side by side, and we just watched this spaceship just fly away, and there was a knowing and a sadness that he was gone, and we didn't know when we were going to see him again. And we just knew, okay, now it's time to do what we have to do.
Why did you keep this a secret, Sev, and then so many years later decide to talk about it?
Yeah, I know. I cannot explain why I kept that as a secret as a child. I've had so many experiences for decades, and I just came out just two years ago. The reason I kept it a secret was because I was really afraid of what people were going to think of me. I was just so concerned that people would think I was nuts. It was hard for me to believe that this was really happening, because this ET contact so often happens in a multi-dimensional fashion. It's not always in 3D while you're wide awake, while you're driving down the road, while you're camping. It is often a multi-dimensional experience, and so because of that, the brain has a hard time labeling that experience. So logic takes over, and then we begin to convince ourselves that that was a dream or that was an imagination. But my experience that happened in 2017 here on the inner banks of North Carolina, where I currently live, made it clear that these are not dreams, because dreams don't put 2 red X marks on your back.
Well, what do you think the reason was for them to burn this marking into your lower back?
I think it was two reasons. First, to just finally get my attention. These ETs have been trying to get my attention for decades, and I've been ignoring them for years. I've had strange marks on my body, swoop marks. There's been bright lights in the hallway. I can feel beings in my room. And each and every time, I would try and find a logical reason to ignore it all. So the two red X marks made me go, whoa, okay, I can no longer ignore this. Another reason is the part of my body where the X marks were put is where we store Kundalini energy.
Are the marks still there?
No.
Did you ever get them checked by a doctor or x-rayed or anything like you never did?
No. At the time that the X marks came, I was with Patrick, my boyfriend. We're no longer together, but he saw the X marks. He witnessed what happened.
These events were occurring to you. Were you ever taken aboard the craft, or was everything done in your room?
My conscious memory of the X marks is that I was not in my room. I was in another room. I was lying on this bed that resembled a hospital bed. And the room that I was in was dimly lit. It was sparsely furnished. I remember only one small, little chest of drawers across from me. I had this feeling of being in a very clean, sterile environment. And I couldn't move my arms, and I couldn't move my legs. I felt paralyzed. And I sensed that there was something behind me. And I couldn't move my head, and I couldn't move my neck. So I turned my head around, and right there, just inches from me, is a gray doing something to my back.
You may have been up in the craft and just didn't know it.
That's possible, Mr. Nori. However, I do have a recollection of something which I had never, ever known before in any of my other experiences. But when I was in that room, I knew I was on the moon. That's all I knew. I just knew I was on the moon. And when I popped back into 3D consciousness, as I say, I was shocked that I thought I was in the moon. I've never had that feeling before.
Why did you have that feeling? I mean, could you see craters out of a little window or anything like that?
It's just a knowing.
Just a feeling.
It's a knowing. It's more than a feeling. It's a knowing that, oh, I am on the moon. I am in this room, and it is on the moon. And it just sounds a little crazy, but I am just telling you what my knowing was. So I locked eyes with this being, and we stared right into each other's eyes. It was like looking into two pools of black oil. And I was scared to death. And I turned my head back around, and then, ding, I'm in my bedroom. I'm wide awake. Like after each of these experiences, when I'm popped back into 3D reality, the eyes pop open completely alert. There's no grogginess or anything. I went downstairs, and this conscious memory accompanied the second X mark. So I went downstairs, and I was really afraid. Because back then, I was really afraid of the Greys. Back then, 3 years ago, I thought they were evil. I've changed my mind since then. So I went downstairs trying to process my memory, waiting for my boyfriend then to wake up. And he came downstairs, and I just started asking him a bunch of questions. Patrick, did you sense anything weird last night? No to everything. And then I had to ask him the dreaded question. I was so afraid, and I asked him, will you look at my back? And he looked, and it was just silent. And I was like, oh my gosh, if there's another X on me, I'm not going to be able to take it. I don't know how I can handle it. So I get emotional recounting the story.
I bet.
I said, well, is there an X? And he said, yeah, there's another one, just like the first one, the same time. And my reality just flipped. It flipped. It's very hard to describe what it feels like when you don't know who you are anymore, you don't know what's real anymore. I was angry, I was sad, I thought they were messing with me. I was just so confused. It's like being in a state of suspended animation. So I started to cry, and he asked me, what can I do for you? And I didn't know. I pulled myself together, and I said, I need help. For the first time in my life, I'm going to admit I need help. I don't know who's going to help me. I don't know how the help is going to come, but I cannot deal with this by myself. And I was just going to organically wait for the help to show up, and it did.
Well, then, you know, and since then, because of what has happened to you, you have decided to help other experiences who are going through the same thing, and probably that a lot of experiencers that you've dealt with, Sev, have gone through this same thing.
It is so rewarding to work with experiences. I work with experiences from around the world, and so many of them started their conversation with, I have never told anybody this, but, and then I heard remarkable stories. And it was then I realized, this is what I want to do. I want to help experiences process what's happening to them. It's very, very important that we don't deny our truth. And it's important that you accept what's happening to you, these unbelievable, amazing experiences, because they help you actually live an easier Earth life. We're being given information which is profound and is geared towards helping us deal with being a human. But we have to get over the shock, and we also have to learn to accept what's happening to us. Usually experiences first are in complete denial because they can't believe it's happening. It's just too crazy and kooky. Second, it's a huge secret. They don't want to tell anybody. And when you hold on to the secret about your truth, it manifests in very negative ways in your life. That was what was happening to me. And so I started this path of authenticity over a decade ago. I decided I need to be the most authentic, real version of myself I can possibly be. That's the only way I'm going to find fulfillment, peace, happiness, be the healthiest that I can be. And as I was walking that path of authenticity, I hit my roadblock of the ETs. And I realized, oh my gosh, I have to run right through this roadblock, and I have to heal whatever it is that I'm running from. That's another reason these X's appeared. I do believe that the grays were helping me. I do believe that the grays were helping me express my authenticity. Once I accepted that, I told myself that it's real, my life changed. I was no longer denying who I really am, and my life started to manifest in a much more pleasurable fashion.
Sev, how many people worldwide do you think this is happening to right now?
Millions of people are having ET contact, and they don't even know it, because most of it happens in this interdimensional fashion, where we have experiences in the other dimensions. And like I said, the brain can't quite come up with a reason or a definition of what's happening. It's our society that is not allowing us to come out and understand what's happening. So this is what I'm doing. I'm speaking up. I was very afraid to speak up. It's the best thing I've ever done. I'm so glad I'm doing it. And the more we experiences come out to ourselves, that's the most important part. You don't have to write a book. You don't have to stand on stage. Come out to yourself, and then you will watch your life change.
All these millions of people that are having these experiences with these ETs, and then I want to ask you where you think they're coming from, but why is it happening?
Every individual has a collective consciousness, and Earth is the same. Earth is also a type of individual, and it also has a collective consciousness, which is comprised of each individual's fears and beliefs and desires. And there is overwhelming collective desire on Earth to know the truth. And so this sits in our collective consciousness, and this energy emanates. We are now seeing what it feels like to divulge the truth. It's ugly, it's nasty, it's difficult, it's also exhilarating and beautiful. In order to touch the truth, in order to uncover the truth, we have to realize, be very aware, that we are a multidimensional being existing in this quantum pool of energy. our life as a human being is a reflection of the rest of us, meaning the parts of us that are experiencing consciousness that is not an earthling. We're all having experiences. We call them past lives. However, quantum physics says there is no past, there is no future. Everything is happening now. So really, your past life is happening now. So we're all having multiple consciousnesses at the same time. And as we're healing one dilemma in one consciousness, we're also healing that same dilemma in another consciousness. So it's this desire that we have. It's an innate desire to know the truth and to be happy. In order for that to happen, we are creating what seems like a disaster and a mess, but really what we're creating is a better version of Earth, a better version, a healthier, a happier, a more loving version. Each of us come to Earth with a particular purpose, an individual purpose, but we all come to Earth sharing one collective purpose, and that is to love as much as possible. That starts with ourselves. Most of us don't show love to ourselves. We're not taught to. And so as we're showing love to ourselves, our reality changes. And as Earth is showing love to itself, Earth's reality changes.
Josh Peck with us, and Derek Gilbert, as we talk about, of course, ancient gods, biblical prophecy. Josh, in biblical prophecy, do you find that there are a lot of references to extraterrestrials, and they talk about it in terms of fallen angels and things like that?
I actually think one of the typical, views is maybe people in the past, they mistook extraterrestrials as fallen angels and things like that. We talk about what if it's the other way around? What if instead of they mistook ETs for angels, what if we're mistaking angels and supernatural beings for ETs? In terms of Bible prophecy, it doesn't specifically say, extraterrestrials, but it does seem to say that some type of supernatural being or something outside our realm of physical understanding is going to have more interaction later on in the end times. That's another point, too, about what supernatural actually means. There's this kind of idea that, something that's supernatural in origin, somehow less physical or less natural than what we experience. Usually like ghosts, for example, are thought of as wispy or ethereal type of creatures. Same with angels, people typically think of. But the ancient Near East belief, it was completely the opposite. These things were actually more physical, and that's where, super physical, supernatural, that's where we get those types of terms from. That they're actually more solid than even we are. All throughout the Bible, angels have these incredible strength and power and all this type of stuff. When we talk about supernatural beings, we're not talking about some wispy, ethereal thing that can't really interact with our realm. We're talking about something even more solid, even more physical. As I look at the world sort of through a lens of quantum physics and extra dimensions and things like that, it just fascinates me, and I think it provides a richer outlook of our reality. But if we think of our reality as just one three-dimensional slice of a larger construct, then these extra dimensions, of which we're just one slice of, could be inhabited by other beings. And that might be what these fallen angels and demons and all these things are. They could just be creatures that consist of more dimensions than we do. That doesn't mean that ET can't exist, but based on the evidence that we looked at, its experiences having are more closely related with something supernatural or super physical rather than just three-dimensional and just purely physical with some type of high degree of technology.
And I think you make a really good point there, Josh. We should point out that it was the late Harvard psychologist Dr. John Mack who pointed out that there are more than 24 points of correlation between the accounts of people who claim to have been abducted by extraterrestrials and those who have been victims of satanic ritual abuse. That's not coincidental.
Right. And we were talking, Derek, about the old gods and tied into the UFO phenomenon.
If the interdimensional hypothesis has merit, as we think it does, then we have to consider the possibility that these visitors, because So we do not discount that something is going on. There are reports that cannot be explained by natural means. But if the interdimensional hypothesis has merit, we have to consider the possibility that these visitors have been with us all along. They're not coming from Zeta Reticuli. They've been here on Earth alongside us for all of recorded human history.
Have you two come across anything that has to do with submersible UFOs or anything like that?
This is actually a theological point, too, the importance of water in the ancient Near East. And I think there's a connection with that and these submersible UFOs that people are seeing and theories about underwater alien bases and things like that. Because even in the ancient Near East, there was a common belief, not just in the biblical narrative, but in all the surrounding cultures and things. There was this understanding that the sea had a connection to a supernatural chaos type of being. It goes by different names in the Bible. It's Leviathan, and there's other texts like the Enuma Elish and stuff that talk about Tiamat, and it goes by different names depending on the culture. But there seems to be this connection to otherworldly beings and water.
We find it in Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 2, where the Bible tells us the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the word translated into English as deep is a Hebrew word, home, which is a cognate, means the same word, different language, from an Akkadian word, Temtu, which was the Akkadian word for the chaos dragon of the ancient Sumerians, Tiamat. Tiamat was defeated by the Babylonian god Marduk. In the Canaanite culture, it was Baal or Baal who defeated the chaos god of the sea. In the Greek cosmology, it was Zeus who defeated the chaos god Typhon, and that's where we connect back into the ancient aliens theory, because Typhon was the god of chaos that Kenneth Grant, Aleister Crowley's personal secretary, believed that he was hearing from what he called the Set. The Set was the Egyptian name for this chaos god Typhon. The Set Sirius current of this Hellenic magic that Aleister Crowley had developed around the turn of the 20th century. So Grant, that's where he developed what Crowley had created or had channeled into this magical system that was based around this chaos god Typhon coming from the star system Sirius. So again, we've got this idea that this chaos god who was there in the beginning of the creation of humanity is somehow coming back and isn't dealt with in Bible prophecy until chapter 21 of the book of Revelation, when the new heaven and the new earth are created. And the sea is no more. The sea, the representation of chaos, this chaos dragon, Typhon, Tiamat, Leviathan, it even shows up in the cosmology and religion of the ancient Indians and the Norse. Their storm god Thor has a battle with a chaos dragon. So it's a very common theme, and we don't think, again, not being coincidence theorists, that this is by accident.
What do you think is more prevalent? Interdimensional beings that are visiting this planet, or beings from other planetary systems in this universe?
From a theological standpoint, and maybe because it's newer to me, I'm really interested in the theological question, could life exist on other planets? Even within an evangelical Christian biblical worldview, are there theological arguments? There's actually a lot of good theological reason to believe that there could be life out there. What I think is interacting with us here on Earth, I think the evidence points to the idea of something extra-dimensional, or at the very least interdimensional. Extra-dimensional being it has origins outside our three dimensions of space and one of time. Interdimensional meaning, maybe it is something within our space and time that has some means to manipulate space and time. So that's the difference between those two terms. But I think that what we're dealing with here on Earth, what's interacting with us, could be explained better through that lens rather than the extraterrestrial lens, meaning that they're from another planet. Now that still is a possibility. There still could be life on other worlds, both theologically and scientifically. Both of those lenses allow for that view, at least the possibility.
I think most people would love these visitations to be coming from within this universe, from other solid planetary systems. For some reason, interdimensional kind of freaks people out.
It freaked me out too until I started really looking into quantum theory and things like that. And looking at it from that stance, writers like Jacques Vallée and John Mack and people like that, it kind of starts to come into clearer focus. I personally think quantum theory should be taught everywhere. I mean, that is, people should just know, or at least have access to it. Unfortunately, we live in a world where A lot of physicists and scientists don't know how to explain it to lay people like you and I in ways we can understand.
Flash flood warning. Flash flood warning.
Have you noticed how most trading adverts start off by showing off a fast car
That I really didn't know anything about. And as I became curious, I thought, well, they in many ways don't sound any more strange than mine, and in some ways seem to make more sense. And I kind of faltered in my Christianity, especially the part of any religion that says we've got it figured out and everybody else doesn't, and probably going to hell for eternity didn't really set that well with me. So I started a project a long time ago, taking the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, and reinterpreting it through a lens because I've learned so much in the last 15 years about physics and the elementary physical aspects of the way our world works. And in many of Jesus' teachings, it seems like he was kind of aware of those processes. He was getting his disciples ready to go out, sending them out to preach in his name, and they said, how are we going to tell people that you really understand what God is and how he works, and why should people believe you? And Jesus said cryptically, tell people I am motion and rest. And you could not describe in 2 words the energy of pulse, which equals, when you have pulse, then you have vibration, and if you have vibration, you have frequency, and if you have pulse, you have energy. So Tesla said if you want to understand the universe, you think of energy, vibration, frequency. And here's Jesus talking about it 2,000 years ago. So it's not a religious book. It's written very softly to honor any spiritual seekers. I don't even use the word religion, but spiritual seekers, and just kind of take the fundamental teachings of Jesus and run them through different, more elementary physics ideas and theories. And it's gotten great reviews. I can't believe it's done as well as it has, especially on Amazon. It's been in the top ranking of spiritual and science books. So that's where you could find it, Amazon, most easily, As Above, So Below, The Quantum Teachings of Jesus. And, ultimately comes about application. What were the teachings of Jesus that weren't super mystical, weren't him saying, I am God and nobody gets to heaven except through me? Those are very rare quote-unquote quotes. 99% of Jesus' teachings, in any form that we can read them, were calls to action. He was telling people, be like this, be kind, be considerate, be forgiving, be like I am being. I kind of wonder if that quote, that I am the light and the truth and of the world, and as I am, only through me, and I'm really thinking like only through the way that I am, the way that I'm showing you how to be is the way that you get to heaven, and heaven can start right here on earth. He was really telling people heaven is already inside of you, and the way you unlock that, the way you enter that kingdom, is being a kind, considerate human being. And very elemental teachings that, if the world followed them, it'd be a different world.
Now, wasn't George Van Tassel into Jesus too in a big way?
He actually was. A lot of people think George Van Tassel must have been, some crazy guy just talking to aliens. But the more he learned, and the more he learned about things that we call miracles, and you could date this back, is when somebody did not understand how something worked, it was called a miracle. And then we start getting into the sciences, and we understand Newtonian laws and push and pull and forces, and we start going, oh, that wasn't a miracle. We understand how that works now. I believe that many of Jesus' teachings were things that we just don't understand how they were done yet. And George Van Tassel actually believed
that Jesus might have been an extraterrestrial visitor. That became his final thought on the matter, that he never renounced Jesus. He was a suit and tie, church-going Christian till the day he died in 1978, the year that I graduated high school. And the application of it, when you think of it through his lens, that maybe Jesus was just almost like a new proto-human, like that technology is actually already inside of us. We think that we're 90% junk DNA. Well, nature doesn't fill itself with a bunch of junk things that it doesn't need. I would say very probably inactive things that are built inside of us. And once they're turned on, switched on in our coding, in our DNA, and in our genetics, we will be able to do things that looked like miracles 10 years ago. And I think that that's really what Jesus was alluding to, is we are of the Father. You know, you go back to Genesis and you hear a multiple. You don't hear a singular God. You hear the plural gods saying, let's make them in our image, meaning we have the technology, those beings have the technology to somehow be involved in our creation. And I believe that they were trying to share, this kind of bridges both the ancient alien and the Jesus stories, that the quote-unquote gods were trying to share information with us that would make us a more intelligent, enlightened species.
Who are the gods, Eric?
Well, we go back to the Anunnaki. I mean, you could call them many different terms in many different religions, but I always go back to the Anunnaki because in the ancient alien theory, canon, we have what are called interventions. It's not just seeing a light in the sky. It's not just shaking hands with an alien or going aboard a ship and being probed and sent back down. It is an actual conversation of sorts. It is an intervention. And 6,000 years ago is the best example that I still believe is out there of an intervention that changed the course of history for humanity, was these sky visitors came down and shared all this information of how to jumpstart our technological advancement. And we're still using those devices today. They're just higher tech versions of the same things that they were taught 6,000 years ago.
What is the relevance, the importance of the sound technology that you've talked about earlier? What does that mean?
Well, sound is going to be, sound and light will be the future of everything. It's already in our telecommunications, medicine. We will look back on the days of cutting people open with scalpels the way we looked at Civil War surgeons cutting limbs off with saws. It'll seem almost barbaric. We will be using sound and vibration. So let's take, for instance, of what sound can do. You can have two different frequencies and you can create cavitation. You can create an elemental aspect where cells rub together because of these frequencies agitated, almost like microwaves, but it's sound waves. And if you're focused precisely, you're cavitating these two cells together and to the point where they explode. Well, imagine if you can do that with cancer cells. You can pinpoint individual cells with sound, pinpoint those, get them to rub, only them to rub together to the point where they dissolve or explode. That would be an incredible application of sound, and we're getting ever closer to that and light. And both of those are waveform technologies. That's, wave, pulse. That's going to be the future in virtually all of our technologies.
Eric, do you think the sound might be messages to us?
I think we're receiving messages, even like the crop circles in England. I think we have been receiving not only number sequences that are a little, sometimes you think, well, what am I supposed to think about these number sequences showing up all over the planet? But crop circles are something else. They're quite complex, embedded with lots of information, and sometimes people can decode syntax out of them, or almost like a blueprint to build something. And I've been inside these crop circles, and a legitimate crop circle. There's fakes and there's legitimate ones, and the legitimate ones have a magnetic signature. The growth nodes are bent, supple, and then re-hardened. There's something so unique about them And I believe even sacred geometry, that there are certain patterns and structures that just sacred geometry would be one, the flower of life. It's found all over the world in its 2D expression, but really I think the invitation is to be a 4D, at least, matrix of creation. Like in the movie Contact, we received 60-something thousand pages, flat pages, that looked like blueprints, but we couldn't read them. We couldn't put them together. And the guy, billionaire who funded the research, says we're not thinking multidimensionally. These people are far more advanced. They've got to be thinking on multiple levels and in multiple expressions of reality. And as soon as we do that, you can take the flower off and actually lift it off the page, and it becomes this incredible lattice that repeats infinitely. It expands on itself, it grows itself, it repeats itself, and that's all bounces out of the flower of life, this 2D drawing that's actually kind of simple looking. So there's so much that feels like communication has been trying to be started with us, and it's kind of hiding in plain sight. And in fact, it's kind of going away in many ways, because if some of your listeners are really on the uptick, they would hear that I mentioned miles and feet and seconds, and they go, well, those are just arbitrary measuring systems. Most of the world is metric. The United States and 2 other little countries are the only countries that still use inches and yards and feet. And you go, well, what's the significance of that? Well, there's a huge significance in it, because that's even after we abandoned either the imperial measuring system that we use here in America or the metric system that's used all over the world, there are some rigid measuring systems that are all over the planet. How we measure time, that's functions of 12s and 60s. That's Sumerian. How we measure feet and yards. If you're an airline pilot or a boat captain, you don't measure in kilometers, you don't measure in statute miles, you measure in nautical miles. Those are based on 60s as well. 1 degree of latitude is 60 nautical miles. A nautical mile is 6,000 feet. A feet is based on 12, which is part of the Sumerian gift counting system. All these things, if we go away completely from these imperial measuring systems and go only metric, we will lose tons of information. And I wonder if it's why America is even still on the base 12 and 60 counting systems, because there's so much information embedded in there about our planet, about us, about nature, about growth patterns, algorithms. It's embedded in that 1260. It's called the sexagesimal math system, and that was one of the gifts that the Anunnaki gave the Sumerians 6,000 years ago.
Tom Matt. He's got a book out, so you can check out his book if you'd like to do that. Jesus Goes to Hollywood, a memoir of madness.
Let me start by painting a picture of the holographic images I see, and I call this upsight vision. The ability to see holographic images that seem to be everywhere around me, and I think around all of us. It's like part of the simulation. Now, what it's not is a vivid mind's eye. It's not a good memory recall. In other words, if I'm driving a car and you're a passenger and we're sitting here driving and you want me to talk about, hey, do you remember the Jaws poster from the 70s, or do you remember the Star Wars poster? I can picture that in my mind's eye, and I can think about that while I'm driving the car. Upsight vision is completely different than that. Upsight vision, when I'm doing upsight vision, I have to literally focus my eyes and see these holographic images. I cannot do any kind of motor activity. I need to see them and focus on them. So if I'm focusing on them, I obviously can't focus on the road. If you and I are talking about, let's say, I'll use a reference again, a Jaws poster, it might, in front of me or to the right, be the Jaws poster, but it could just as easily be elephant riding a bicycle in a circus. So this has been happening to me for a dozen years. Let me tell you kind of what they look like, too, if I can. The first one is a movie a couple of years ago on Netflix called The Queen's Gambit. And when the protagonist is laying in the bed, she looks at the ceiling, and she can see the chess pieces moving around. This is what upside looks like to me, except it's usually clear with a colored tint. Or if you have not seen The Queen's Gambit, there's a movie, the Iron Man movie, Tony Stark is in his office, and he's got the holographic images around him. It is literally that graphic and that detailed and that immersive. So that's kind of what it looks like. So I've not had this my whole life, right? About a dozen years, I went through a severe mental health crisis. I was addicted to cocaine. Everything from an addiction perspective came to a head. I walked out of my business. My family was horrible. By the end of the year, I'd lost everything. Spent all my money. I ended up homeless in LA. It was, like I said, it was really bad. But at the end of the year, I'm sitting on my couch, right? And I look over. There were 4 holographic images right in front of me. The back of a dinosaur, blood cells moving to a body, the slot machine, and the Grim Reaper. The first time I did this, I was absolutely high. But even then, I needed 2 of the keepers. I did not need to be on cocaine to see them. So that was the last time I ever used. I'm almost 12 years sober now. I got 2 MRIs. After this happens, when something like that happens, I've seen enough movies, I think all of us have, where you're like, okay, you've got this extraordinary ability, something's touching on an area of your brain, and there's a tumor or there is a lesion. But I had 2 separate MRIs. There was no damage from drug use. There were no lesions, no tumors. There's nothing wrong with the brain. So I got a clean bill of health that way. But obviously, none of the doctors could say what was going on. None of the eye doctors, nothing. I've been searching. But I know my curiosity and my desire for answers has driven me over the last dozen years. And I want to say another thing, too, because, again, I think it's important for the listener, too, because people are like, well, it's an hallucination. Here's the deal. We know this is external, right? And we know this starts externally for a couple of reasons. Number 1, my eyes get tired focusing on these images, correct? Number 2, there's something called pursuit eye movement. So when your eye tracks something, there are tracking devices, moving from left to right. If you see like a jaguar running across the savannah, if I'm looking at something that you would be next to me thinking it's a blank wall, but I'm seeing something move across it, we can track that with my eyes. My pupils dilate when something is arousing or exciting, and that can only be done from an external stimuli. Typically, you get some studies up in the Ion Zoetics Institute. So we studied my brain waves. This is hooked up to an EEG machine with the control of memory recall, and then I would see an image, and then I would see it get upside. But here's the thing. This is the wild thing, Connie. Now, once I have engaged with this external image, let's say I see this elephant juggling in a circus, then this is where it becomes extraordinary. It's like a conversation. I can change it with a thought. So now I can influence what it is. I can change it from an elephant to a coyote to whatever. I can have, I can do anything. I can make the elephant fly like dumplings. So that's where it's, like I said, next level. And that's just a kind of a fun thing. There's intellectual property, there's really important things, there's structural things in this space too. That's what got it started. It's like a muscle. The more I use it, the more information I download from this place. And I call this place the Akashic Records, the Book of Life, the Noosphere. I call it the Organic Metaverse. And recently I've called it a hidden biosphere because I think it's with us. It's not apart from, it is connected to us.
You think we can all see it if we're trained?
That's a good question. I think about that a lot from the different people that have reached out to me. Maybe to some degree or another, and I thought about it like this. Most people can sing, but we're not all Adele. We're not all Frank Sinatra. So that's the key. Some of us, I think, have it really strong, and mine is extremely developed, and I've worked on it. Like there's somebody that reached out to me just a couple months ago and said, well, listen, I can see these holographic images, but I can't change them. Maybe if you practice.
So let's say we're both sitting on the couch. Just out of nowhere, will these random things come up? Or can you also say, hey, you know what? I'd like to see a monkey jumping up and down eating a banana.
Okay, yeah, and let's be honest, they do not interfere. This is not a schizo effect. They do not interfere with my daily life. I go through life every day. It's not like they come out and I don't think they're real. I have to shift my attention, shift my focus, and pay attention to it. I want to be very clear about that, right? Once that happens, the first engagement, it could be a monkey eating a banana or something.
But it can just pop up?
It's almost always on. I look at it like tuning into a radio station. It's always on, but once I tune into it, then I can pay attention. Now, I say almost always on. I wake up in the morning from a deep sleep. These things are not there. It takes a minute. Now, when I go to sleep at night, I shut my eyes, and there's always something there. So at first I was like, oh, this is going to be brutal. But I learned to picture the side of a stream, picture a calm river or a side of a lake or an ocean. And that works. And boom, off to sleep.
Okay, so when you see these things, are they always at the same distance away, or are they at different distances and heights?
So they are different distances. I don't know what distance it's settled on, for lack of a better word, right? I don't know what the comfortable distance is. I'm in the living room now. I'm looking at a wall 10 feet away from me, and my eyes are really right on the wall, and I can see something, right? If I'm outside and I look at the sky, I know the focus is farther away, but I couldn't tell you if it's 30 or 40 feet away. And my eyes settle into wherever this thing is, wherever it decides to be. So the range is different. Maybe we can liken it to a voice. And for whatever reason outside, it goes farther, again, for whatever reason.
One of the things I believe that you saw, JFK.
I wrote a blog, and it's on the Ions Noetics website, and it's called Is Upsight Vision a Psychic Ability? It is its own thing. It is its own category. Seeing and interacting with these holographic images are its own category. Remote viewing, telepathy, precognition, and lucid dreaming, those are a couple examples of psi abilities. This can touch on those things. If I remote view, or if I look back and see that event, I don't know if it's telling me the truth. What it shows me is a lot of times complete nonsense. I can't win a horse race. The JFK assassination, I don't know if it's true, but I've seen some things there for sure. I think people know this. Some people say it's the driver turnaround shot, but the original shot was from underneath the car. It was a can't miss shot. They showed me that. Let's talk about what remote viewing is for just a minute. Technically, remote viewing is hitting a target. It was developed by the government, years and years ago. So to be a remote viewer is to hit a target that they want you to view. To me, that's like hitting the C note of the song. Mine is being able to see all these different things holographically, whether they're true or not, and still see them. Some of them may be true, some of them may be partially true. I'll tell you what I can't do. I cannot see anything that would be dangerous to me. It won't show it. I tried the Area 51. It just won't do it. The FC thing, I can't see anything, right? It's just like a haze. For the Area 51, it's got two guard dogs, like an old German World War II movie. So I know that's not there. I know there's no guys out in front of this door with two Doberman pinchers. But that's what it shows me, and I can't get past that.
So you can pull up what you want.
I don't try to do anything, like I say, that's dangerous. There's no point. It's like, tell you what it's like, honestly. Again, remember, I think this is a mutation of some kind, and it's just for my survival. So I'm not going to put my hand closer to a stove. At some point, you're smart enough. You're like, okay, stop. This is the same thing. There's an intelligence behind this, whether it's conscious or unconscious. It's like, okay, don't be an idiot.
Do you think you know what that intelligence is?
My own intelligence, right, on a level. Or it could be something, a guide, a spirit guide, a non-human intelligence guide. Yeah, I don't have the answer to that, but I do definitely feel like there's an intelligent cosmic guide. We can call it whatever we want because I don't have an answer, but there's something that is definitely guiding me to see these things. Again, it could be part of me. My wife thinks it could be like a DNA, something that knows something inside of us that knows more, but we don't have an answer.
You can actually turn this off and on.
Without a doubt. And actually, that's a good segue into talking about what we did up at IONS, the Noetics Institute. I was hooked up to an EEG. I went up there last summer, right? I was hooked up to an EEG, and they wanted to see my brain states, right? Across all brain waves, alpha, beta, gamma, theta, all of them. So we did 200 randomized testings. The first brain state, as what we talked about earlier, was what is my brain state while I'm remembering something. They would put an image up on the screen, and then I would have to remember that with my mind's eye. Then they would put an image up on the screen, and I would need to see it with upsight vision. Now, the guy that ran this test, I call him Mozart of EEG test. He's done over 150 of these things. He knows what he's doing. He said the results were unambiguous, right, across every brain state. What was really interesting about that, if you know anything about these kind of studies, or the brain states for in dreaming, lucid dreaming, and mediums, the theta state is the active one. That's the one that's active in lucid dreaming, and even just dreaming. But believe it or not, the alpha brain state is what the relaxed brain state. Typically, it's relaxed. While I'm doing upsight, the alpha brain state and they have some visual images of this. It's like in Rudolph's nose. It's off the charts. It's not red though. It's blue. Now there's an under peer review paper waiting to be peer reviewed. So when this thing gets published, it's going to be in a scientific journal. Like this is like real science. This isn't just me saying stuff. They were very intrigued by it. And again, these results are ambiguous, and hopefully the paper will be published within the next 30, 60, 90 days.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm looking forward to that. Do you get a sneak peek of it, or you gotta wait?
No, I've seen it. There's a link on my website. There's a link to it on my website. No, absolutely. It's on a place called Archive. It's sitting there. People can read it if you can understand it.
Mr. Tuttle. Okay. Is that
paper? No, you can read the abstract is understandable. The deep science and the math, not the math, but the science. Maybe most people wouldn't. I certainly didn't.
Is that at the tom-matt.com?
Yeah. There's actually, on that page, there's a link to Upside Vision on the first page on the picture of the microscope, and on that page, there's a link to the peer review paper.
Okay, excellent. Well, do you, it's so amazing that you can do that, and I love that you can do it on call. I love, on demand. That's all really just something special. If I'm in the room with you, and you and I are talking, let's say we're having dinner, and I'm looking at you, and then all of a sudden, I'm telling you a conversation, all of a sudden I see your little eyes go somewhere else, and you actually watch something walk by or something. It doesn't mean that that's the waiter going by. You could be seeing some sort of panther, trotting over from behind me or something.
Yeah, but I would have to choose to do that, right? I would have to choose to do that. I would have to.
That means my conversation was boring to you.
Well, yeah. Well, that's actually a funny point, because sometimes I have this feeling that I should do it for whatever reason. Sometimes I have a feeling that I should do it for whatever reason. So yeah, it would not probably happen while we were having dinner, no matter how boring you and I might be with each other. This is where it's really interesting from a practical standpoint and a hidden biosphere standpoint, as opposed to this extra-dimensional space we can't get to, right? I can see what is an impossible perspective, right? When you think of a double rainbow, everybody thinks of a double rainbow as a smaller rainbow in the middle that's darker, and there's a larger rainbow outside of it, okay? And they're flat because one is on top of the other one from the human perspective. For whatever reason, I can jump out of my human perspective and look at the side of a double rainbow. Now, let's be clear, there's no such thing as a side of a double rainbow. It doesn't exist. It's an illusion of perspective. But what it shows me is those two funnels. The first funnel is spinning towards the perspective of the person until the electromagnetic wave gets too small, too compressed. Then it spins backwards out of the funnel, and the diffused one, or the lighter one, it's going in the other direction. And the Alexander's band is where they overlap. Now, I know I'm talking about things people might not know, but just look it up on Wikipedia, you'll see it. So it's weird. So my point is, it's interacting, whatever this is I'm seeing, it interacts with us in ways that we don't understand because we don't have perspective.
Okay, so, and you had said that you can